Hey, welcome back to the July installment of the UFS Wine Club. Sam Vandegrift, thanks for joining us. I picked a couple things this month that really speak to the way I've been eating at home, which is trying to drink super crisp, refreshing whites, and then trying to find some reds to go with the meat I'm cooking over fire. So, to start, the bonus wine, if you will, the Green Eyes Gruner Veltliner. And Gruner Veltliner is this grape that you find almost entirely from Austria. I mean, you'll occasionally come across it from somewhere else, but this really is a specialty of Austria, and it has a very unique character to it. So it is bright and crisp and easy drinking, but it also has a little bit more body to it, kind of in the way that you would expect Chardonnay to, but without any oak. So what I notice on the nose, too, with Gruner always is this white pepper element. So go ahead and give this a little swirl. I notice this like lemon curd and this almost creamy vanilla kind of white pepper. And then if you take a sip too, this is just bright and fresh. It's a little bit almost prickly, like it has a little CO2 in it. So not really carbonated, but just like very lively. And that white pepper note really follows through onto the palate. I also notice this wine has a lot of weight. There's almost a little bit of tannin at the front. So this is going to be an excellent partner with whatever salad, vegetable, chicken situation you have going on this summer. And it's really lovely. It's going to handle spice pretty well. And I'm not sure it's going to handle your elephant repellent habaneros, but I think certainly with habaneros and things like that, as long as they're kind of tempered with a little sugar, you're going to do great with them. So this is lovely. And again, Gruner Veltliner is this thing that I look to as far as like value and complexity and also weight. It's a wine that I think always really is surprisingly well made and is kind of one of my go-tos in the summer. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the reds. And I have been cooking over fire all summer. That's kind of the way that our food has gone at our house. And when I think about that style of cooking, especially with beef, I think about the way that a lot of beef is cooked in Argentina. And if you have the opportunity to watch this program, and we'll put a link to this down in the comments, Mind of a Chef had an episode in one of the seasons where Edward Lee, who's this really awesome Louisville chef, goes to Argentina to see Francis Malman and discover the ways of cooking over fire. And it is really a beautiful piece of television, and it's also like a very inspiring cooking show. It's really rooted in this idea of living life, enjoying who you are, and drinking great wine with food. So I encourage you to check that out. So what we have here today are two wines from Argentina that I think are really representative of that kind of sense of place from Mendoza. They're both from that region. And Mendoza is really the best well-known of the regions in Argentina. It's certainly where we see the most wines. And if you look at any wine shop, certainly here most of the wines from Argentina are from that little region, and it produces the bulk of the wines that come to the United States. Most famous is Malbec, right? We'll get to that one second. And Malbec, along with Cabernet Franc, are both what are called Bordeaux varietals. So they're grapes that originate in Bordeaux, and along with Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, they make up that classic Bordeaux blend. These two usually aren't the stars of the show, and so it's kind of interesting to get to taste them as single varietal wines. And certainly in Argentina, Malbec really is the star of the show. I mean, that's basically what we think of when we think about Argentinian red wine. That's the first thing that comes to mind for most of us. So we're going to start with the La Madrid, or the La Madrid Cabernet Franc. But La Madrid is this really interesting property. It's now multi-generational. The founder fled Cuba as a child. It really has this beautiful story behind it. But they get this essence of place really correct in these wines. They're really beautiful. So this is all Cabernet Franc from a single vineyard. See some new oak. Also spent some time in some used barrel, and it's beautiful texture. So again, I always start by smelling, but then let's go back and take a look at the way this wine looks. And you'll notice this wine is purple. It's kind of the same color all the way throughout. And we'll come back to that in a second when we get to the second wine. That's kind of noteworthy. This is really typical for what I think Cabernet Franc delivers. And Cabernet Franc, compared to Cabernet Sauvignon, tends to be a little bit lighter, and it tends to have a little bit more of kind of a red hue to it. And what I mean by that is if Cabernet Sauvignon gives you black currants and black cherry and dark chocolate, in Cabernet Franc, I feel like you get kind of a red currant, red raspberry, and maybe like 60% cocoa. So you still get a lot of the same flavors. They're just a little bit gentler. And the other thing that Cab Franc always has for me when it's really expressing itself is this kind of blonde tobacco and olive character to it, which I love. I think it makes the wine really savory, but you still get that beautiful fruit to kind of balance things out. So if you go ahead and give this a swirl and really stick your nose in there, first thing that jumps out at me is the red fruit. So crushed red berries, and that can be everything from red currants to raspberries to cherries to cranberries on this wine. And there's also that kind of green olive tapenade quality, which I just adore. So if you want to pause it and think about that for a minute and come back, please do. But when we jump into the way this tastes, remember, take a sip, swish it around, and then think about whether or not it matches what you smelled. So I noticed this wine has a really juicy texture to it. That red fruit, that raspberry, it's really making me salivate. It's delicious. That red fruit, that raspberry, and that currant really follows through to the palate. I get a little bit of weight from the oak, and I'm also just overwhelmed by how refreshing the wine is. Full-bodied dry reds sometimes can be a little clunky, but both of these you're going to see are really amazingly refreshing. They would even take a little bit of a chill, right? So if you're outside barbecuing, you could have a glass of this that came in from the air conditioning. It'd be really nice and refreshing. And that acidity that it has is really going to be a great partner with food. So it'll help cut through the fat in whatever you're cooking. But there's also a smoky element in the base of this. And the earthiness in this wine is going to pair really well with this char marks that you get on a really nice piece of meat. So this is lovely. All right, so to a slightly older, maybe more traditional, I would say, for the region wine. So the Casa Natal Malbec. This is 2013. Also really a tremendous value. This wine is full of all of the stuffing I love about Malbec. It has this really beautiful floral quality to it, which if you take a quick whiff, I get this kind of violet potpourri quality, which is something that I notice is very typical from Argentine Malbec, and it can go kind of one of two ways. Sometimes it's a little bit sweeter, but this really takes it in this kind of savory dimension where it marries very well with that earthiness that I think if you taste the earthiness between these two wines, you're going to notice kind of a similarity between them. So go ahead again and let's take a look at the color, because I mentioned this earlier. We're talking about a wine that's slightly younger. The Casa Natal is a couple more years in bottle, and you'll notice it's starting to get a little bit of brickish kind of orange around the edge. Not a ton, but it's giving you this hint that maybe this wine's seen some more bottle age. And this wine, so if it was picked in 2013, probably spent about a year and a half in barrel and in processing. And so it's been in bottle now for about 5 years, and it's starting to really come into its own. If you have this, I would start to drink this wine now. It's great. So go ahead and give it a little swirl, stick your nose in there, and let's look to see what's different and the same in these two wines. And I skipped ahead a little bit, but the same kind of earthiness, that almost like red clay, terracotta, black pepper note exists in both of the wines. I really think that's something that stands out from this region more than necessarily the winemakers or the vintage or something like that. I really think that that's kind of an expression of where these wines come from. The Malbec tends to turn things a little bit more purple. So I get plum and blackberry. Again, I said violet. And I also notice a little bit of licorice. And I skipped ahead. So if you want to pause for a second, this is a great time to do that. But when I smelled this wine, I noticed that kind of sweet licorice note that is at once earthy, but also kind of complex and spicy. It's really interesting. And when I took a sip of this wine, that flavor totally comes through. And it's this really nice base note, right? It's like it's providing the kind of percussive layer underneath the fruit. So when I sit down and think about the texture in this wine, right, I notice that there is that kind of common thread of earthiness. There's a lot of licorice in it. There's this really silky fruit above it. And again, this wine spent some time in bottle, so I really think that even though it's full-bodied, I really think the tannins have kind of cooled off a little bit with some time in bottle. And then you get this bright acidity, almost like that kind of hi-hat that's really punctuating things and making this wine, again, really refreshing for how big and rich that it is. So that's something I love about both these wines. So we're going to have a couple grilled items for you. as far as the recipes go with these wines this month. I want you to try them out. And really go ahead and challenge your friends to join you in this. I don't know how many of us are cooking together yet on the patio. We're having small groups over. Maybe you're not yet. But I've had really successful dinner parties over Zoom recently. It's been a lot of fun. So I encourage you to try that out too. And thanks for watching. We have all kinds of lovely things for you to come pick up. And we'll have these wines in stock as long as they last. They're both pretty small production. We're talking about 1,000 cases made of each of these guys. So they're not going to be something we'll be able to have indefinitely, but we'll keep them in as long as we can. Thank you so much. We'll see you in August.